Hello again. It's just another day in the life of a military wife, and today's topic is going to be hitting on a couple points. I want to talk about a few things that are more current, that stem from military policies that have been around for a long time, as well as the 80th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor, and some stories and information that I had never heard of before, which for me is kind of surprising because my boys are obsessed with history and all things military, World War II even. And I thought I knew a lot, but there's always more to learn. So we're going to talk about that, and I'm going to share what I found out. You're listening to Life of a Military Wife, and I am your host, Sam Wolf. Okay, so kind of first things first-ish. I don't know how many people are aware, but there was a bill in Congress, trying to expand the draft. And there's also been a bill trying to get rid of the draft. Personally, I'm kind of in favor of getting rid of the draft. We haven't used the draft in over 50 years. And even when we did, common opinions of military leaders was that draftees tend to be less effective in combat situations than volunteers. And considering we haven't used it in a long time, and we have a pretty good, base of a volunteer corps, and we also have a pretty good reserve and guard contingencies, I just don't really ever see the need for a draft, especially since if we ever get into a situation where we're in a war, Congress will hopefully declare it, and people will be willing to serve. So that's my opinion. But I was really surprised when there was a huge push, and it actually got further than normal, to expand the draft to cover women. In July, the Senate Armed Service Committee voted on it, and it only finally just recently got, set aside. But it's just one of those things that I think sometimes people even forget that the draft is still technically around. Selective service is still a thing for male members of the United States citizenry over age 18. Now, because we've not used it in 50 years, I really think most people kind of forget it's there. But yeah, technically still selective service is a thing, but drafts haven't happened in forever. And it doesn't look like it's going to be extended to women. The whole justification for pushing for women to be included was they said, quote, it was necessary and fair step to expanding to include women. And I guess that's a matter of opinion. I don't really see it. The NDAA said that we should not draft women, and that they were grateful for the efforts of the senators that got this, basically railroaded it and just made sure it didn't happen, basically got it squashed. So that's one little fact. And I think that part of the reason why that kind of popped into my head was with the whole Pearl Harbor thing. World War II, there was a lot of volunteering in World War II. I think that's another really good example of a lot of volunteerism. But we've had other wars like Vietnam where drafting was the way it went. A Civil War, there was a level of a draft too, but there was a lot of volunteering. And all in all, I think that's really just kind of an up in the air sort of thing. But as I was researching the 80th anniversary of Pearl Harbor, I ran across some things that, particularly an account about Sterling Cal, who was a sailor at Pearl Harbor. And he actually worked at a dispensary. He was medical and he would dispense like prescriptions and stuff. And his story, as I was reading it, I just found it really captivating. And it was a story that I had not heard before. And so I wanted to share it with you. Most people know that December 7th, 1941, a day that will live in infamy. They know the basics that the Japanese had planned on declaring war as the attack happened, but the orders to declare war got delayed. And so they attacked before officially declaring war. It was a whole little political jumbleness. It happened on a Sunday morning, which was one of the days where they just really weren't very prepared. That just wasn't it was most of people's day off. People were at church, people were sleeping. And so there was, the state of readiness was below where it probably should have been. Another reason why it was devastating was because we had all of our battleships in the harbor where they couldn't get out easily because we were not really concerned with an aerial bombardment. We were more concerned with submarines and stuff. Ironically enough, though, our carriers were not in the harbor at the time. And there's a lot of information and reasons behind that. We found out more recently that the Japanese not only had airplanes in the sky, but they also had 4 very small submarines, and that also contributed to the loss of life in the harbor itself. So I was going through all this, I'm like, okay, most people know that general concept of Pearl Harbor, but what are some real first-hand accounts? What are some things that really happened that people saw themselves, and these people are still alive and they've shared these stories? Because I'm sure there's ones I hadn't heard. And of course, as I start researching this, I found several I hadn't heard, and one in particular that I really wanted to share with you. And that is, again, Sterling Cal. Now, the reason why I picked this one is because it also ties into some things I've learned more recently, and some experiences I've had with people I knew in the military. So I wanted to kind of tie those together. Okay, so let's set the scene. Again, Sunday morning, December 7th, Sterling had been working through the night at the dispensary, and he had just gotten off and was going back to sleep when he noticed some planes were flying over Battleship Row, the area of the harbor where all the battleships had been lined up. And as he, continued to look, he realized those were Japanese planes, and it hit him, we're under attack. And so his first instinct was to run to the armory, break into the armory, and take some guns. And the reason why I'm kind of chuckling about this is because after the fact, he technically got reprimanded for breaking into the armory and stealing guns during quote unquote peacetime. He never got written up. He didn't get in trouble for it. In fact, they gave him a pack of cigarettes because he was so quick thinking into just taking care of the situation. He's like, okay, I don't know if they're hitting ground next or what's happening. Let's be armed. And so it's just interesting. There were people who were totally panic stricken, but he seems to have, at least come to the conclusion to do something pretty quick. Once he got back outside with the guns, he noticed that they were planes dropping bombs into the water, and that he had friends on these battleships, and he knew that they would need his help. So him and some buddies started heading towards the USS Oklahoma, and they got there, and it rolled over. And so they just jumped into the water. There's oil in the water at this point, and it's caught fire, and it's burning, and there's people trying to get out, and just chaos. And him and his buddies are swimming in the water and pulling people out to shore. Some of them are alive, some of them are not alive. And they're just in t-shirts and shorts at this point. And the top of the water catches fire. And I think I said it was burning. Yeah. So the oil had caught fire and there was these flames going on. And so they're diving under these flames to get past them so they can get to these people. And the USS Arizona blows up right next to him almost. He was far enough away that he was safe, but it was still very close. And he said that it was so deafening he'd never forget it. And that it burned for like 2.5 days. So for about 4 hours, him and his buddies are doing this, and he picked up about 45 people. Some were badly burned. Some were just tired and exhausted from trying to get out of the boat. Just all sorts of stuff. He dragged them to safety, 45 people. But that wasn't the end of it. We have a saying in the military that you don't leave people behind. And that's true. And U.S. military tries to recover its service members, even if they know that they're not alive. Especially then, we want to be able to give that closure to their families. And so he spent the next days, weeks, helping recover bodies that were just of people who had been lost in the attack. And they ended up being able to recover. He was on a 10-man detail to recover bodies, and they ended up recovering somewhere near 2,000 or something bodies. It was just a ridiculously high number. And just 3 weeks on this detail, keeping track of conditions and the locations of remains, and trying to find dog tags. And he himself personally removed 107 bodies. Some were known and some were unknown, and then unquantifiable amount of unidentifiable bodies. But dog tags had been lost, and then at one point, it's just sad, the amount of individuals. But the thing is, this is actually, and I don't know if people are aware of it, this is something that's still going on. Our pediatrician, when we were at our first duty station, our kid's doctor was a military service member who was a doctor. And she loved being a pediatrician because she really loved being with the babies and the kids. Because what she did for her other assignments was she would be sent to battlefields in Asia, from the Korean War to the Vietnam War to the World War II, to identify and find remains of missing soldiers. And she was telling me about it one time, and it was meaningful, and she was glad that she could give those families closures, but it was just really hard to handle. And that's why she really loved working with all of these cute, adorable babies that were just bursting with happy life, because it helped balance a lot of the, ness of having to deal with those who had not made it home. But yeah, so they do have these recovery teams and recovery crews. And I've heard stories of this, from stories like this from the Civil War as well. And it just struck me as powerful because they dove. It wasn't just him. It was him and his buddies. They dove into burning water to save their friends. This is the absolute amazing valor and selfless sacrifice that our service members are willing to do. He ended up fighting at Guadalcanal, and then switching from the Navy to the Army. He served in both Korea and Vietnam. And just, yeah, he likes being retired. But anyway, it was just incredible to hear that story of his and to just think of all the things he had done. And there's a lot of these firsthand accounts. I'm going to include the website where I first learned about him. I researched him more. He's actually written a whole book, and his book is called, I'm making sure I say this right, A True American by Sterling Cale. And a lot of these people have written book accounts of their stories. There's Daniel Stratton, who wrote one as well. No, sorry, Daniel Stratton. Okay, he wrote one about Pearl Harbor survivors tell their stories, all the gallant men. And he is one of the last survivors of the USS Arizona. So yeah, there's a lot of these really great books, and with it being the 80th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor, I just kind of thought it would be interesting to share some of these accounts with you. One of them was actually by some locals. There is one, it's called Counting My Blessings by Herbert Weatherwax, and it's an autobiography of a native Hawaiian and their survival of Pearl Harbor. But yeah, there's just some really incredible, powerful stories in here, and I just really encourage you. Again, I link it there for you to go and look them up, but it's one thing to know the timeline of what happened and when, but it's a whole nother to actually start reading these firsthand accounts of these individuals who saw it happen. And every day, it's depressing. Every day we lose more and more of our firsthand accounts from World War II. And to me, I feel like that's tragic, because I grew up hearing firsthand accounts from grandparents and great-grandparents and uncles, great-uncles and stuff. My husband, 3 of his 4 grandparents served in World War II, all 3 of whom have since passed away. One of his grandma served, and I've talked about her before. I absolutely adore her. I love hearing stories about her time in the military. But we're losing these firsthand accounts, or at least we're losing the ability to talk to these people directly. So the fact that they have written them down for us to read is powerful, because that means we won't lose these stories. And so my other little caveat is, if you know a World War II vet and they are still able to, tell you these stories, record them, because we're losing them. We're losing this wonderful generation that did so much for the world and for our country. So, yep, that's my little spiel. It should have clicked in sooner, but I didn't realize until I saw a news article on it that this was the 80th anniversary. And there's a reason why it was the day that will live in infamy. The United States of America has not been attacked by a lot of other countries. We are blessed. There has been very few instances where we have been directly impacted by military invasions or attacks by other countries. And the last military attack on the United States really was Pearl Harbor. And so the fact that that was 80 years ago, and that most of the people who were there to see it aren't even alive anymore, really contributes to how blessed we are as a country. To have that comfort and peace of mind. And I hope that and pray that it stays that way, that we are able to continue with that peace of mind and that level of protection. But a lot of the reason why we are able to do that is because of our service members. And okay, I just have to. It's the whole Christmas-ness thing. But there are a lot of service members away from their families at this time of year. So I just encourage you to do what you can to reach out and to tell them thank you, or their families, because it's not easy to be without a loved one on the holidays. We've had to do it quite a few times, our family. And so that's just a recognition of the sacrifices they're making. That said, it's kind of short and sweet. I'm not as long of an episode this week, but don't worry, I have more to say come next week. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed finding out more about the Pearl Harbor and everything. And I hope you have a wonderful Christmas or Hanukkah or holidays, whatever it is. And hopefully you'll get to spend it with friends and family. And with that, I am your host, Sam Wolf, and you have been listening to Life of a Military Wife.